The rain began just as Elena stepped from the taxi, droplets sliding down the black umbrella like the years she'd tried to forget. The old brick manor loomed ahead, its windows glowing with laughter she no longer belonged to. Inside, her former classmates shimmered under chandeliers, toasting their success, unaware she was watching from the threshold. "You're just a guest now, Elena," one of them had said last time, voice dripping with pity. But this time she carried something heavier than humiliation. A folded letter sealed in wax, proof of the promise that had once bound them all. Her pulse throbbed as she walked toward the doors. She could almost hear the echoes of her younger self laughing in these halls, before betrayal turned her into a ghost haunting her own past. Tonight, she would just attend the reunion. She would rewrite its ending. The murmur of reunion chatter swirled around Elena like static as she drifted toward the corner where the old photographs hung. Each frame held faces she once trusted. Laughter now turned to ghosts. Her fingers brushed a photo from senior year, smiles frozen around a promise they swore never to break. She could still hear that vow whispered under the oak tree. "We'll all rise together." Yet, when her fall came, they watched in silence. Behind her, the hostess's perfume approached, sweet as poison. "Didn't expect you'd come," the woman said smoothly. Elena smiled, eyes never leaving the photo. "I had unfinished business." Music drifted from the ballroom, slow and haunting. Elena moved through clusters of guests who parted like mist, their smiles tight. Her old friend, David, stood near the bar, now a polished executive with the same wary eyes. "Elena?" he said, disbelief shading his voice. She stepped closer, her tone calm but sharp. Still keeping secrets for her? His glass froze halfway to his lips. The silence between them carried years of betrayal, broken trust, and something else. Regret. The band struck a familiar note, the melody of their school anthem. It pierced the night like truth, finally surfacing. The night air was colder on the balcony, the rain now a fine mist. Elena leaned on the railing, city lights glittering below. She opened the letter, her trembling hands revealing faded ink, proof of the promise they made and broke. Behind her, the hostess appeared, glass in hand. "You should have stayed gone," she murmured. Elena turned slowly, eyes fierce yet sad. "And miss watching you remember what you did?" Lightning flashed, illuminating them both. Two versions of the past colliding at last. Back inside, the music stopped. Elena laid the opened letter on the piano, its ink shining under the chandelier. Gasps rippled through the room as guests recognized the handwriting, the founder's words promising her partnership, not exile. "You're just a guest," they once said. Now, silence claimed them all. Elena's voice was steady. "A promise kept late is still a promise kept." She turned, walking toward the door as the storm eased, leaving only the echo of her heels and the weight of truth behind. Morning bled through the curtains of Elena's hotel room, soft and pale against the ache behind her eyes. The reunion had ended, but the tremor it caused still hummed in her veins. She sat on the edge of the bed, the letter now resting beside her like a weapon used too late. The city outside was muted, washed clean by rain. Yet she felt no relief. A message notification blinked on her phone, an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about the promise." Her breath hitched. The handwriting on the letter wasn't just nostalgia. It was a living secret, still breathing somewhere among them. She stood, dressed, and slipped the letter into her coat once more. The battle wasn't over. It was only unmasked. The cafe near the river was quiet, the kind of place where truth could hide in plain sight. Elena sat by the window, rain streaks still visible on the glass when David entered, coat collar damp and eyes hollow. He looked older than the night before, burdened by something heavier than guilt. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," he said, sliding into the seat opposite. "She made us believe you'd betrayed the group." Elena's fingers curled around her cup, and you believed her. Silence settled between them, broken only by the hum of the espresso machine. When he finally looked up, regret flickered like the first spark of redemption. By afternoon, Elena found herself at the old university grounds where the promise had first been made. The oak tree still stood, roots deep in damp earth, leaves whispering the same lies of loyalty and youth. She knelt, brushing away dirt from a half-buried tin box. Inside lay faded photos, trinkets, and a torn page, proof of who wrote the letter. Her chest tightened as she recognized the handwriting. The hostess, Lila. Every word she'd denied, every act she'd hidden was right there in ink and earth. The promise wasn't broken by time. It was buried by deceit. Evening drew near as Elena returned to her apartment. The evidence spread across the table. Every photo, every note formed a mosaic of betrayal. Her reflection in the window was steady now. Haunted, yes, but sure. The phone rang again. Same unknown number. This time she answered. Lila's voice, smooth and cold. You're digging too deep, Elena. Let the past stay buried. A pause. Then Elena's reply, sharp as glass. You buried it with lies. I'm just unearthing the truth. The call ended, but the silence afterward felt alive with danger. Night cloaked the city in indigo and silver. As Elena walked along the riverbank, coat pulled tight against the chill. The truth she carried now was no longer about vengeance. It was about closure. The promise they made under the oak wasn't just to her. It was to the version of themselves they'd abandoned. She stopped at the bridge, pulled out her phone, and recorded her voice, steady and clear. To anyone who remembers that night, you'll hear the truth tomorrow. Her reflection shimmered on the dark water, unbroken for the first time in years. The morning news flickered across every screen in the cafe. Elena's voice, her message, her truth now public. The videos spread overnight, stirring whispers and reopening wounds, long sealed by silence. She watched quietly from her seat, coffee untouched, as the anchors recited her words. The promise was never broken by me. The reunion guests, once untouchable, now found their reputations under the same light I'd once used to blind her. Across town, Lila stared at her own reflection, rage masked behind a perfect smile. The war they started years ago had returned, not with vengeance, but with revelation. Elena knew there was no turning back. By midday, Elena walked through the university's archives, the air thick with the scent of paper and dust. Old records lay scattered across a wooden table as she traced signatures and notes that proved Lila's manipulations went deeper than friendship. They involved funding, deceit, and betrayal of every member. Footsteps echoed behind her. David appeared, holding an envelope. You were right, he said softly. Inside were receipts, Lila's signature, forged promises, and the final betrayal. She framed you to save herself. Elena nodded, her voice low. Then it's time everyone saw what she buried. That evening, Elena stood before the old campus auditorium, where a charity gala now glittered under chandeliers. The same place they'd made their promise. She had the documents in her purse and courage steady in her breath. The air hummed with polite laughter as she entered, her heels echoing against marble. Lila stood at the center, surrounded by admirers. When their eyes met, the air stilled. You should have stayed gone, Lila murmured, lips barely moving. Elena's smile was soft, unbroken, and let you rewrite history again. The music faltered. 1,000 eyes turned as truth poised to speak. Elena stepped onto the stage uninvited, microphone in hand, voice steady as glass. We made a promise under that oak to rise together, but one of us decided to climb by stepping on the rest. Gasps swept through the room as she lifted the documents for all to see. Lila's mask cracked, her smile dissolving into fury. You're lying, she spat. But the crowd had already seen the proof. The words on paper shone beneath the lights. Undeniable. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was shame. Elena felt the weight finally lift. When it was over, Elena stepped into the cool night, the murmur of scandal echoing behind her. The air smelled of rain again, but this time it carried no sorrow. David followed her outside, hands in pockets, uncertain. "You really did it," he said. She looked up at the stars just beginning to pierce the clouds. "No," she replied softly. "I just told the truth." The wind lifted her hair as they walked toward the streetlights, two ghosts finally free of their unfinished past. The promise had come full circle, not broken, but redeemed. Days passed, but the echoes of that night refused to fade. Headlines carried Elena's name alongside words like whistleblower, betrayal, and truth. She sat by her apartment window, watching the city pulse below. Somewhere between vindication and exhaustion, justice felt quieter than she expected, almost hollow. The letter that once burned in her hands now lay folded on her desk, its edges worn soft. David called every morning, his voice steadier now, though neither of them spoke about the damage done. Beneath the triumph lingered a question she couldn't silence. Was the truth worth the ruin it left behind? At the same oak tree where it all began, Elena met David again. The ground was still damp, the air sharp with the scent of earth. Between them lay the old tin box, now empty. "We built everything on trust," she said softly. "And when it cracked, we buried the truth to keep the image alive." David nodded, eyes downcast. "But now it's real again, even if it hurts," she smiled faintly, fingers brushing the bark. "Then maybe it was worth it." The wind rustled the branches above, as if the tree itself remembered. Lila's downfall came quietly, without spectacle. News broke of her resignation, her silence heavier than denial. Elena watched the report from a distance, emotion unreadable. Once, she would celebrate it. Now she only felt a strange empathy for the woman who built her power from fear. The truth had freed her, but it had also broken something fundamental in them both. That night, Elena opened her journal for the first time in years and wrote one line, "I forgive you." It wasn't for Lila. It was for the part of herself that had lived too long in anger. The reunion crowd faded into memory, yet Elena still received letters, some from classmates, others from strangers who saw courage where she only felt survival. One envelope, unsigned, held a photo of them all under the oak tree, years younger, faces bright with belief. On the back, one sentence, "We should have listened." She stared at it for a long time, then pinned it to her wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how truth grows in silence until someone dares to speak. At dusk, Elena returned once more to the riverside bridge, where she had recorded her confession. The water shimmered beneath the fading sun, calm and endless. She leaned against the railing, eyes on the horizon. "Maybe being a guest wasn't so bad," she whispered, smiling faintly. "Guests can leave when they've said what they came to say." The city's lights flickered to life, each reflection a fragment of everything she'd reclaimed. She took a final deep breath and let the last copy of the letter drift into the river. It floated away, carrying the promise home. A week after the storm settled, Elena stood in a quiet art gallery downtown, walls lined with black and white photographs from her graduating year. Time had turned those moments into artifacts, delicate and distant. She moved slowly, tracing the edges of her younger self in each frame. The dreamer, the believer, the girl who trusted too easily. Yet in the reflection of the glass, she saw someone new, composed, grounded, whole. A curator approached, smiling. "You were one of them, weren't you?" Elena nodded. "Once. But I think I finally became me." The words settled softly, like peace after thunder. Later that afternoon, Elena met David at a small bookstore cafe, the smell of paper and espresso filling the air. They spoke easily now, laughter returning in small, tentative bursts. "So what happens next?" he asked. She looked out the window at the passing crowd, a faint smile curling her lips. "Maybe something honest for once." He raised his cup in a quiet toast. "To honesty, then." She clinked her mug gently against his, their reflections overlapping in the glass. Two people who'd finally outgrown the ghosts they once were. Back home, Elena opened her laptop and began typing. The Guest's Promise. A true story. Each word flowed easier than she expected, the act itself a release. She wrote not to accuse, but to understand. The choices, the silence, the cost of truth. By the time she finished, the night had deepened, and the city hummed outside her window. The final line read, "Sometimes, losing your place is the only way to find where you belong." She saved the document and exhaled, tears soft with relief. Weeks later, her article spread quietly online. Shared, discussed, debated. Messages flooded her inbox, some grateful, some angry, all alive with connection. She read each one carefully, realizing that the promise she exposed had become something larger. A mirror for others still trapped in their own unfinished stories. Standing by her window, she whispered, "Maybe that's what truth is meant to do." Echo. Outside, spring began to bloom, soft green leaves, unfurling where rain once fell. On the anniversary of the reunion, Elena returned to the manor, not for vengeance but for closure. The hall stood empty now, chairs stacked, chandeliers unlit. She walked to the center of the floor, where laughter once rang, then closed her eyes. For a moment, she imagined the younger faces again, all the dreams, all the voices. Then she smiled and whispered, "Goodbye." As she stepped outside, sunlight pierced the clouds, bathing her in gold. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, but this time, it felt like renewal. Months later, the city had changed its rhythm, and so had Elena. She walked through the early morning streets toward a modest office building where a new sign read, "Truthlings, Independent Journalism." Her article had inspired others, and now she'd built something lasting from the wreckage. A platform for stories like hers told without fear. As she stepped inside, the scent of fresh paint and coffee greeted her. A young intern looked up, eyes wide with admiration. "You're her, aren't you?" Elena smiled gently. "No, I'm just someone who stopped pretending." The words carried no bitterness, only freedom. Inside the office, sunlight poured across rows of desks cluttered with notebooks, half-empty coffee cups, and the hum of new beginnings. Elena sat with her small team, discussing stories, corruption, hidden promises, quiet heroes. Her voice was calm, assured, but her gaze softened as she listened. Once, she had been silenced. Now, she amplified others. David entered, a folder in hand, smiling. "You built this," he said. She shook her head. "No, we built this. Truth doesn't grow alone." And for the first time, she believed it. One afternoon, Elena found an envelope slipped under her office door. No sender, only her name written in familiar script. Inside was a photograph of the oak tree, the same one where it all began, now surrounded by blossoms. On the back, a note. "It's still standing." She turned it over in her hands, a small smile touching her lips. The past had stopped chasing her. Now, it simply existed, unchanged, forgiven. She pinned the photo to her office board, between headlines of courage and survival. That evening, Elena met David by the river where everything once broke apart. The water shimmered beneath city lights, peaceful now, as though forgiving their history. "Funny," he said, gazing at the current. "We spent years fighting the truth, and it still found us." She nodded. "The truth doesn't chase, it waits," Their laughter was soft, easy, unguarded. They didn't speak of the past anymore. They'd learned to let it rest where it belonged, in the river, beneath the reflection of who they'd become. Back home, Elena opened her journal one last time. The pages, once heavy with grief, now felt weightless. She wrote, "The promise wasn't about them. It was about me, about keeping faith in who I could still become." She closed the book and placed it on her shelf, beside a framed photo of the oak tree. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, but no rain came. The air felt full, alive, forgiving. She turned off the light and whispered to the dark, "I kept the promise." And for the first time, she truly had. Years later, the oak tree still stood tall, roots deep and steady against the pull of time. Elena, now older, returned with a small group of young journalists from Truthlings, their laughter echoing through the campus courtyard. She watched them set up cameras beneath the same branches that once sheltered her own promise, their energy reminding her of everything she'd once lost and found again. "Why here?" one of them asked. Elena smiled faintly. "Because truth begins where silence once grew." The wind moved through the leaves like applause, soft and knowing, as she stepped back to let the next generation speak. The following week, Elena stood on a small stage at a journalism conference, lights soft on her face, her voice calm and sure. "When I told my story, I wasn't trying to expose anyone," she said. "I was trying to remind myself, and all of us, that truth doesn't destroy. It clarifies." The audience listened in stillness. Behind her, projected on the screen, was that same oak tree, its branches wide like open arms. As she ended her talk, applause filled the room, not for scandal or revelation, but for the quiet courage of honesty. After the event, Elena found herself outside in the evening air, city lights glowing like constellations. David appeared beside her, hair grayer now, but smile unchanged. "You ever think we'd make it here?" he asked. She laughed softly. "Not once. That's why it feels real." They walked together toward the street, no longer haunted by ghosts, only guided by what they'd built. For the first time, their silence was comfortable, not filled with what was lost, but with gratitude for what remained. At home, Elena placed a framed photo of the Truthlings team beside her journal. The shelves now held stories she had helped others tell. Voices, once silenced, now preserved. She ran her fingers along the spines, smiling. Her apartment was filled with warmth. Not grandeur, but presence. The hum of life. The scent of jasmine tea. The echo of laughter that had replaced the weight of solitude. In the window's reflection, she saw herself not as the guest she'd once been called, but as the host of her own truth. On the 15th anniversary of the reunion, Elena returned to the manor one last time. The halls had been restored, laughter reborn as a community center for young writers. She wandered through the rooms, touched by echoes of what once was. In the main hall, a plaque hung by the door, dedicated to those who keep their promises. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "We did." She stepped into the sunlight, her reflection merging with the open sky. The past was not gone. It had simply grown roots, deep and alive, like the oak still standing far beyond the hill.